Chapter 14. I feel nervous as we sit at the coffee shop waiting for Beth and her brother James. What do you say to a person who, up until a few months ago, was homeless and addicted to drugs? Will he be weird? Or missing all of his teeth? Will his skin be all pitted and peeling off like the pictures I've seen of meth heads? I fiddle with the tails of my red blouse as they lie in my lap and look anxiously around the coffee shop. I didn't even think to ask Beth what she looks like or what she would be wearing. For all I know, they're already here. There are several tables that have a man and a woman at them, but they all seem pretty absorbed in each other, not like they're waiting for someone. So I keep my eyes on the door, expecting them to come through any minute. 15 minutes later, they still haven't arrived. Evelyn, Aunt Susan, and I play hangman on a napkin. Dad is clearly getting a little irritated. We had planned to wait to get our drinks until they arrived, but Dad finally pushes his chair back. Let's go ahead and get drinks. Maybe that'll help the wait. Kate, here's my cell phone. Why don't you try calling Beth while I'm ordering? He gets everyone's drink orders and heads for the counter. I fish Beth's number out of my pocket, grateful that Dad reminded me to bring it. Unfortunately, I realize when voicemail picks up, the only phone number I have for Beth is her work number. And of course she isn't there on a Saturday. Just at that moment, though, a man and a woman walk through the door and look around the coffee shop. The woman is tall, slender, and pretty, with rich auburn hair cut in layers that frame her face. The man looks older than she is, which surprises me, since she mentioned that he was her younger brother. He's clean-shaven, but his skin looks weathered, and his hair is heavily peppered with gray. The woman's gaze settles on us when she sees me watching them. She smiles tentatively, and I smile back, and they approach our table, just as Dad arrives with the drinks. We all stand to make the introductions, and then Aunt Susan heads to the counter to get coffees for Beth and her brother. James speaks up, a deep and friendly baritone. I'm so sorry we're late. I've started working at the mission, and there was a situation that I needed to help with. I wonder what the situation might have been, but James clearly is not prepared to talk about it. Having just met the man, I'm certainly not going to ask. He pulls back a chair for his sister, waits for her to sit, then takes a chair for himself, as the rest of us resume our seats. Aunt Susan returns with their coffees, sitting down just as James begins. So I understand you've been looking for this. He sets the bead in the middle of the table. I nod mutely. He seems friendly enough, but I find myself intimidated by him. I guess it's because I know about his past. The fact that he is missing several teeth doesn't help either. James picks up the bead again, staring at it as he holds it in his palm, as if it were a cherished possession, rather than just a small bead. There's something special about this bead, but you know that already, don't you? That's why you're looking for it. Again I nod, but I don't say anything. I think my sister told you a bit about my story, but I'm sure she didn't go into details. I've always been a private person, and she respects that. But I feel that I should tell you the whole story, or at least more than I would typically tell someone I just met. So, here it goes. Beth and I lost our parents when she was 19 and I was 16. Mom died suddenly of a heart attack, and Dad died just a few months later. James's mouth twists bitterly. That left Beth responsible for me, which couldn't have been easy since I was a pretty rebellious teenager and I was trying to pretend that I wasn't hurting. I had already fallen in with the wrong crowd, and when my friends started doing drugs, the easy thing to do was to follow right along. I wanted to escape from life, you know, from losing my mom and dad, and from being dependent on my big sister. Beth smiles a bit sadly. We started smoking a little marijuana on the weekends. It didn't seem like a big deal. Then one day, a friend got hold of some methamphetamine. We all agreed that we'd try it just once. Then we'd never do it again. It wasn't that easy, though. One time wasn't enough. I wanted more, and I was willing to do anything to get it. I stole from Beth. I took everything I could find, all to get my next hit. Finally, she had to kick me out. He looks at Beth, whose face is filled with guilt. She starts, I still feel terrible about that, but I just didn't know what else to do. No, Beth, you did what you had to. I would have taken everything you had eventually. He turned back to me and Evelyn. I was out of my mind. I didn't care about anyone or anything except how I was going to score my next hit. I wound up living in a homeless community down by the canal. Everybody had their little spot. I managed to find some old shipping pallets and made a tiny shack out of that. It was a dangerous place, and you had to watch your back constantly, because most of the people were like me, willing to do anything to get their drug of choice. I was so angry that Beth had kicked me out, I didn't contact her for a long time. After a while, though, I thought maybe she'd give me some money, or at least some food, so I finally called her. And after that, I'd call her every couple of months or so. She'd meet me at what became our regular spot. I knew I was breaking her heart, but I just couldn't stop what I was doing. She'd bring me food, and maybe clothes and socks and shoes and things like that, but not money. Never money. She knew what I'd do with it. James runs a hand across his face, which is creased and worn like that of an old man. Of all of my friends who started doing drugs with me, only one other got clean. 3 of them are dead, overdosed, or killed by some stupid thing they did because of the meth. 2 are in jail, one of them for murder, the other for armed robbery. He sits looking at his coffee for a long moment. Yeah, I'm lucky to be alive. Or blessed, I guess I should say. He looks up, now looking each of us in the eye, and then looking at his sister. I made my apologies to Beth earlier this week. What I did to her was terrible, inexcusable, and I wouldn't blame her if she refused to forgive me. His bottom lip quivers a bit, and Beth takes his hand in hers, giving it a squeeze for reassurance. I owe my recovery to her not giving up on me. And to this bead. He holds the bead up between his thumb and finger. Beth tells me it's from a rosary, and I guess I'm not surprised. We grew up Catholic, but when Mom and Dad died, I stopped going to Mass. I stopped praying and stopped believing. I just didn't get how God could let such a bad thing happen. Beth kept going to church, and I suppose her faith is the reason she's been so generous and loving all these years. And so incredibly forgiving. James looks at Beth again, and then settles his gaze on me. Last fall, I felt this overwhelming urge to call my sister. I happened to have a quarter in my pocket, so I walked to a payphone and dialed her number. We arranged to meet, and when we did, she gave me this bead. This silly little bead on a cheap chain. I took it just to make her happy, but honestly, I was thinking about how much I might be able to get if I pawned it or traded it. I'm ashamed to admit that I was trying to think of a dealer whose initials were the same as mine, JCL. Fortunately, I didn't figure that out, and I still had the bead around my neck the following day when I came down from the hit I took right after I met with Beth. He shakes his head, as if struggling to believe the story he's about to tell. I was in my little pallet home, huddled against the cold morning air, shivering the way I always would when coming down from a hit. Then all of a sudden my hut got very warm, and my shivering stopped. A woman stood in front of me. Chills run down my spine. Evelyn grabs my arm, and we look quickly at each other as James continues. She was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. But it wasn't really anything about her face or her hair or anything like that. It was her joy. She had so much joy in her that you could see it in her face, and she actually lit up my little shack. James sets the bead down and leans forward on his chair, gripping the edge of the table. She didn't say anything, but I knew who she was. Mary. I don't know how I knew. I just knew. James pauses, and I nod mutely as I look around the table. Beth is misty-eyed, and Aunt Susan bears an awe-filled expression, while Dad seems politely doubtful. Evelyn's eyes are wide with shock and excitement. I return my focus to James as he goes on. I also knew why she was there. To help me straighten up my act. Thoughts filled my head about the terrible things I'd done, and the people I'd hurt, but also about the person I could become. a trustworthy brother, a loyal friend, maybe even a husband and a father. He smiles, looking around the table. Right there, I decided I would go get help. The woman smiled, even more radiant than before, and held out her arms to me. James's face lights up. He closes his eyes, seeming to savor the memory before he opens them and says matter-of-factly, "Then she disappeared." He sits back in his chair now, a look of wonder returning to his face. I could have sworn the chain with the bead was still around my neck. I never took it off, but somehow I found that I was holding the bead in my hand. I know I didn't put it there. He shakes his head as if he's still having a hard time believing it all, as the rest of us sit in rapt attention. It took me a while to recover my wits, but when I did, I put the chain back around my neck, packed up my few belongings, and walked to the mission. He looks at Beth as if making a promise. I've been clean ever since, and I'll never go back to what I was before. Now James leans forward again and looks at Evelyn and then at me. So you see, I believe this bead is special. But like I said, I think you already know that. I can't think of anything I can say to such an amazing story. I look at Dad sitting across the table from me, and I'm startled to see that he looks a little bit sick. But then he speaks up, and I'm shocked by what he says. Yes, James, you're right. So far we know of 3 people besides Kate who have been given one of these beads, and something extraordinary happened to each one of them shortly afterwards. I didn't believe it, and I'm not sure I believe it now. But it does believe as though there's something special about them. Evelyn kicks me under the table, hard, and I jump. Everyone is looking at me, so I feel like I have to say something. I add, yes, one girl was in a really bad car accident, but she wasn't hurt. And a little girl has been cured from cancer. And then there's you. I pause. And the way I found my bead, well, that was kind of special too. But I haven't seen any miracles yet. Now Aunt Susan speaks up. Maybe there's another kind of miracle for you, Kate. Perhaps finding the first bead and discovering all these amazing stories, perhaps all this is working a miracle in your heart. I realize that she's right. This little bead which I roll between my fingers now as it hangs about my neck. Finding it and searching for the others, hearing the miracles that have happened, this little bead has brought me a mother I never knew I had. A calming prayer that I never cared about before, and a faith in God I can really trust and believe in. I nod my head slowly, still rolling the bead between my fingers. I think you're right, Aunt Susan. I look at her in the eyes. I think you're right.